started, this is, we would like to do a conversation with you guys. So as you have things to say, since this is a big room, I can walk around with the mic. So just, wave me down. I'll be watching for you. But my name is Whitney. I am the support and training specialist at Clockwork, where we all work together in different focuses and areas, but we all work together every day. So, and that's kind of what this discussion is about. It's just all of us working together. So everyone's going to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into it. Kevin?
I'm Kevin O'Brien. I'm a front-end production manager at Clockwork.
I'm Kristi McKinney. I'm a user experience and strategist at Clockwork.
I'm Andrew Leaf. I'm a software test engineer.
And I'm Matt Gray. I'm director of technology and nerd. And as Whitney mentioned, hello and welcome to Silos Are for Farmers. If that's not the talk that you came to see, you're in the wrong spot. And we're going to spend some time talking about collaboration and talking about talking. I've been through sessions, all day, and I realize you may be suffering from an advanced case of slide fatigue. I assure you that there are no slides here, so yes, thank you. And so we're going to talk about collaboration and specifically how to collaborate across disciplines and talk to one another, because when you're working on a web team or really any software team, what can make or break a project is your ability to work with folks of a different discipline, whether that's dev versus QA, business analyst and UX, or even considering the client in a silo of their own.
Cool. So we sort of brainstormed before some of the cliche battles that occur, and obviously dev and QA is kind of the first one that comes up that butt heads because they're kind of designed to do so. And I think a lot of times, and Andrew can probably talk a little bit more to this, but a lot of times I think in cultures and companies they're encouraged to kind of butt heads, but here or at Clockwork, one of our big things is that we all sort of work together, especially between the devs and the QAs, and the devs sort of want the critique and I think part of it is because of how we deliver that kind of message.
So before we launch into that discussion, can we get a quick count of, raise your hand please if you're a dev. Awesome. QA? Okay. Design, front-end development? UX? Awesome. This is fantastic. Perfect. I was worried we might speak to a room, all full of devs or all full of one group. So let's talk about dev versus QA, because that's kind of like a stereotypical team anti-pattern where you've got this adversarial relationship between developers and QA. And when each of us are in our respective bunkers firing shots at each other, it doesn't really work very well. It doesn't work in the client's best interest. So Leaf, can you tell us a story about dev versus QA conflict?
Actually, at Clockwork, I'm very fortunate that I don't run into that a lot. I do run into it occasionally, or have in previous careers where, or when I started out in QA, learning out how to be objective when documenting a defect, documenting things in non-personal terms. Don't use the word you. Don't. Alex Barrett is one of our developers here, and I'm going to call him out because I insulted him in a bug this week. But he took it in stride, and we have a culture that allows for that at Clockwork. But not speaking in adversarial terms or personal terms when documenting a defect. Like I've learned to use words like the user clicks on, or the application does this, not this is broken, or you do this and it breaks, that sort of thing. Previously I worked with a lot of international teams, and I found that some international teams like different dialects of English better than others. I had a project manager approach me once that Evidently, even though we had a set of guidelines we were adhering to, and those guidelines had certain phrases, I had one Austrian developer that didn't like the word must. So when we said the application must do X, that didn't go over well with the developer, who was very stubborn. So we worked with the project manager to get over that and change the way my team was writing defects.
Yeah, I agree that objectivity is important when describing the work, because if you think of what a developer does as carefully taking cards out of a deck and building this wonderful house, and then QA walks along and bumps the table, the whole house falls down, and goes, oh, not structurally sound. The dev can naturally feel like, hey, this was a personal creation of mine. I poured my thinking and my creative energy into building this thing. And when you talk about a defect, if you use very personal or accusatory language, it's almost like telling a dev, you were thinking about that wrong. And that can come across, I feel, as a very sort of personal attack. And we're wired for fight or flight. That can either trigger conflict or retreat. And then I might not communicate vital information, if I feel you're an enemy, not working towards a common goal of, hey, we got to ship this software.
Yeah, and it's a mutual goal in shipping a project. And my job isn't to distrust you. It's to make sure that our client has the product we're billing them for. I mean, that the product they want delivered. So we're working as a team. And in the past, I have had that dev versus QA, and it works a lot smoother when everybody understands we're trying to ship a product, and let's find the defects and make sure that we find them and not the consumer.
I'm going to steal a phrase from an earlier talk by Jeff Sussna, and that is unity of purpose. The team has a unity of purpose. We have to recognize that. As companies grow larger, you have specialists. You have different departments. They report to different people. They may be in different parts of the building and not talk, or be different buildings entirely or countries. But we have to try to remember, when we're working in these emotionally charged, often deadline-driven situations, we have a common purpose, and that is to ship great software. And when we can hold on to that and remember it, and not let a defect or its description come off as a personal attack, we're going to win. That's why integrating QA in the entire process is also valuable, because otherwise you feel like, I'm sure you've felt in the past like you're following behind a donkey cart.
Yeah. Oh, and keeping in this situation, or any project situation, keeping QA involved in the whole project. For example, I don't have surprises at the end when I bugged something because it behaved differently than I expected. I actually knew why it was there, what the discussion was that led there, why the behavior is that way, and what our client is expecting, and that minimizes downtime for everybody.
So then what happens, you can kind of get, I'm going to say train, but you can kind of train people that you work with to, deliver messages in a certain way, and that's, you can kind of get used to the people you work with and realize that must might be a horrible word, or you can completely insult Alex Barrett and he'll take it in stride. But what happens then, if the client is the person that's delivering that critique? You're a front-end person, so a lot of times the client thinks something is going to look one way or act some way, and then it gets delivered. How can you kind of, and you typically are a production lead on a team, so it's your job to kind of take that information and then deliver it back to, the rest of the team.
Yeah, and I think Clockwork has a good setup as far as communication, both in person and over the computer. We're always actively on Messenger, walking over to people's desks, sending emails, communicating face-to-face, and one of the things we do, too, is communicate what we're going to do before we do it to the whole team, not to just the one person that it affects. And where we really see the benefit there is the developers create their development plan, production creates our production plan, and then the QA creates a test plan, and it's all based off of features that have been discussed with the client and things like that, so we can all get on the same page. One of the hardest things is when you start to get invalid bugs or something like that from a team member who maybe misunderstands requirements or something like that, but it kind of throws off the project, and it's kind of just a kink in the communication there. And so it's nice to be able to discuss all of that stuff with everybody involved in the team, make sure everybody's on the same page, and having QA circle back, especially on front-end dev, when you have potentially 20 different browsers with all their versions and devices and connection speeds and things. It's very likely that the client is going to have a setup that maybe I don't have on my computer. But if I'm working with a QA person, knowing that their goal is to make my stuff better, and my goal is to explain, what I've set up, the reasons for it, some things that I think might be buggy, but maybe don't have the setup to test it myself or something like that. Having that open communication in all those channels and having those messages delivered as early as possible, I think really helps that.
I completely agree. And I'm going to add one thing, and then I'd like to ask if anyone has a QA relationship story that they would like to share, good or bad, something that worked or did not. But integrating QA into the process and also demystifying QA as well, I think is a great technique. And by that I mean specifically, Leaf puts together a test plan. It is a wonderful thing for the developers to participate in and review a test plan. It might seem counterintuitive. It might seem like, hey, they're reading what the test is going to be. They're cheating. But it's really amazing because it's very easy to miss something when you craft a test plan and something a dev poured a week or 2 weeks into and is kind of worried about, and it only has a few test cases. You can say, hey, you might want to kick the tires a little bit more on this section. And I guarantee if a dev reviews a test plan before testing begins, the first thing that will happen is their eyes will sort of go back and they'll start thinking, and they'll go, you know what, hold off one moment and wait just a few more hours or another day and then get to testing. I've got to take care of one or two more things. Because they'll see right away before any testing had to happen that there was a communications gap. And you get that benefit by not being adversarial, by not saying, well, shoot, it's me versus him and I'm going to win. You can achieve much better results without falling into that mindset. So does anyone... excellent.
Do you want this, or do you think it can be loud enough?
Pretty loud.
All right.
Yeah, well, about 20 years ago, I worked for a company where the development organization and the QA organization reported to separate VPs. And it didn't work very well. There was no trust. There was actually a lot of laziness inside the QA group. Quality was not very good. And then they blew it up. And they fired the lazy testers, and they took the good ones and just dissolved them into development groups. So you'd have a development group with like 5 developers and a tester, and it was one group. And the first thing that happened was, there was this notion that there should be an adversarial relationship so that the testers can verify, validate, audit what the developers are doing. Once they blew up that over-the-wall thing, quality skyrocketed overnight. And one of the things that happened, and one of the things that I've seen happen continually, is that the more you involve the QA people in the whole process, including upfront design discussions, better. Because a couple of things happen. One is that the QA people will actually point out problems up front so they never get coded. But the other thing is that they play a positive role of, well, if you do it this way, it might be better. And there's a level of mutual respect that happens. And so that whole process of, well, I'm worried that you're going to find problems. Well, I trust you. I value you and I want you to find problems. So that by shifting the cultural relationship, I think quality goes up tremendously.
completely agree, and I think we see that at Clockwork. It's so easy to like catch a bug when it's a bug in requirements analysis, and hey, it doesn't take even an hour to change a paragraph in a spec. But if you wait to throw it over the wall to QA and find all the bugs, you might have thousands of lines of code or tens of thousands with dependencies that are based on a fundamental mistake in planning that was not caught, an oversight or omission. And it's expensive, it's painful, it's usually traumatic to the client because those sorts of discoveries tend to have heavy timeline impacts. So yeah, there's a lot of value, I think, in treating QA as a member of the team throughout the entire project process.
I think also the type of person that's really good at QA and really becomes passionate about that sort of thing has certain personality traits that make them very valuable in requirements defining. Like if you are talking with a QA, you'll see them QA documents, QA conversations, QA people, like behaviors, things like that. It's pretty crazy. It's kind of funny because you can call them out and they're like, you're QAing this thing right now, aren't you?
I pointed out a bug in the last session.
So to have somebody like that looking at, when the client has 4 bullet points that equates out to 200 hours of work, and 2 words in a sentence could mean the difference between 5 hours or 80 hours. Having a QA there to think about all the different possibilities and different cases and things like that is extremely helpful at any point in the process. And I think, going back to the personality type and just the things that really drives them.
I've had actually QA come to my sitemap and wireframe reviews, which is not really what you expect as a UX person. You don't expect QA to come in and say, oh, well, this wireframe, whatever. But it was one of the most valuable things I think that has ever happened in my wireframe review because they caught, they challenged me right away, asked me a lot of questions, and a lot of things were caught ahead of time that maybe would have sort of gotten through all the way to even production at that point. So it was really valuable to have someone actually QA wireframes before they continue on the process.
Okay, so a hand go up.
Yeah, I'm actually toying with an idea of taking things a step further at my company, and I haven't quite decided if it's a horrible idea or not, which is a lot of companies have an everybody does customer support philosophy. I mean, some of you may have been at the talk that we heard from Lupo. It's really great. It encourages empathy. It's a sort of all for one, one for all kind of environment. Kind of wondering if we should be doing the same thing at my company with QA. So there's no QA team, there's no QA people, everybody does QA. Marketing, customer support, you do QA. Does anyone want to tell me why that's a really bad idea?
I would be hesitant, but whenever I'm like my mother, whenever I tell my mother something, for the first 5 minutes she reacts with negative things on why it's a bad idea.
That's why you're doing QA, though.
Exactly.
Thanks, Mom. So that can be dangerous. There's definitely times where that's been good, and I know I haven't experienced it, but at Clockwork we have done that in the past, where we've actually had QAs and devs write test cases and then handed them out to the entire company and say, hey, can you look at these 10 cases and look at that. It is nice having dedicated people, but everybody shares and stuff. Everybody finds bugs. I mean, it's the silo thing. We're not in silos. Guess what? I get to fix bugs every once in a while. That blows my mind. But every once in a while, I get to approach a dev and say, hey, you mind if I just switch this value? This is fix the problem when I did it this way. Can I commit that? So we're definitely there's flexibility. Lines blur a little bit. I'm still not open to your idea.
Actually, I like it because, and here's why. When I joined Clockwork, we were 8 people. We're now 60 people. So I've been, through a period of substantial growth. When I joined Clockwork, there were exactly 0 QA staff. And it is a terrible thing to not have any QA. I love QA. Like, don't get me wrong. But as a developer, I now know I have huge blind spots. I am a semi-truck of an individual when it comes to my code. There are all sorts of really danger zones that I never see when I'm working because I'm focused on creating, not critiquing, on building and not checking and verifying. So if only to have different people with different sort of preconceptions about what's being built, to have different people look at the end product and to give feedback on it, I think is valuable. To have people who test something that wasn't directly involved in building it is valuable. So even if that's what it takes to bootstrap a QA discipline, I think it's worth a shot. Is it a replacement for dedicated trained QA? No, I don't think so.
And there's definite times where it could be more beneficial than others. Like if something's being developed early on, before it's even maybe ready to see a client, it's probably not a good point to do that, because you've got a bunch of people going, well, the design doesn't look right in Internet Explorer 6. And it probably won't in many cases. But there are times when having that, getting developers to do stuff, I mean, getting a dog to eat its own, or eating the dog's food, I believe is the food you give to I don't know.
So there's a dog and food. Okay.
I'm hungry. But no, there is a time to have developers and designers. Actually, we have one of our designers at Clockwork has the most ridiculous bug reports, because he'll narrow down to the pixel and the shade and the gradient in CSS that needs to be changed. And guess what? I've got great eyes, especially for functionality. I probably would miss if the gradient is off. Micah doesn't. So
I think too, Clockwork, we always say that we only hire people that are UX people. Like no matter what you're hired for, you're still a UX person. You're advocating for, is this going to be easy to use? Is this going to make sense? And so, whenever the team looks at the site, you're essentially QAing it from your different perspective also. Design is making sure that, design is on and everything. I find that a lot of times QA, if that's kind of your dedicated thing, you get to really know and make efficient the processes for maybe setting up a database with populating a bunch of users, or really destroying some sort of dev code that interacts with the database or something. So it's good to have the dedicated people that do that, because although we're all UX people, we still have a UX team and UX leads and things like that. So agreeing with Matt, I think it's a good idea to give it a shot. But one, as long as you're not QAing your own code, and then two, if you have some sort of lead that can really take the lead on it, if you guys can work that in.
And in terms of our message, I see a hand, so I'll be very brief. In terms of our message about crafting communication to be designed for collaboration, I think if you do choose to go that route, a brief bit on some emotional intelligence with respect to reporting bugs, because it's the creative output of the professionals on a web team is so close to the thinking in their head that it just by nature becomes very personal, and so it's easy, to read a bug report and get irrationally mad if it's written that way. So.
And there's no shame in asking a QA how you want, or asking a QA or asking a dev how they want to see a bug come through. Because I do the support, so I see things, that we miss sometimes, and I had no idea how to write it in a way that would be helpful for a dev, because I'm not a dev.
We've spoken to how you guys communicate in between teams. I'm curious how you arrive at where you are now. Like, how formal is that communication? Is it documented? Is it part of your procedures? Is it just organic in the culture?
Sure, I think that's a great question. And to one, I don't have like a ready, pat answer, because I think it's a lot of things. I think when we were 8 people, it was sort of that familial startup culture where information flows pretty freely. You don't need a lot of process in order to organize and shape that flow of information. So that sort of happens naturally. That's also really, I think, where the company's culture is born and shaped in those early stages. And then you grow, and you have to somehow maintain that, which was the topic of the last session that I was at, which it's very, very difficult to do that. And so I think in terms of culture, it starts from the goals are top down. Our president is our cultural leader, Nancy Lyons, and she will, she tells us, that we are a company, and we are, that believes in telling the truth, delivering good and bad news at the same speed, respecting our peers, and working together. And as such, with those values in mind and embodying those values as employees, we really haven't needed to put up too much structure and process as a company of 60 there's no checkbox that says, Matt, go talk to Leaf about the bug that was just logged. If I read the bug and I don't quite get it, or I think Leaf might be missing something, rather than just say, nope, invalid, and cryptic comment here, throw it back over the wall, I'll go talk to them. And that's just placing that value on person-to-person, peer-to-peer communication within the company as a value, as part of the culture, I think is what drives a lot of our collaboration. What do you guys think?
Well, we do have a significant documentation process, and we do take advantage of checklists and things that certain people need to do that has been documented. And that's even grown over the last year that I've been there, because there are certain steps we need to make sure as we keep up with the growth of our company to make sure the culture stays there. But when I was brought on, it was made clear to me that we're all the smartest people in the room. So you're not smarter than anybody else, and everybody else is smarter than you, at least in one thing. And because of that, I think everybody believes that, and we all treat each other well. And I mean, this is Saturday, and we're hanging out with each other, and there's a good chance that we might be hanging out with each other at this time on a normal Saturday anyway. And I lost my train of thought.
Well, so I think as far as getting kind of a process that works for us, like Leaf was saying, we have kind of documented what our process is, but as Matt was saying, it's kind of this just thing that's been ingrained into the culture. And our process is really more about, these are the key points that we try to make sure to hit on every project, because when we don't hit these things, the projects always seem to fail. And the other thing is, it's also flexible. So if a project doesn't seem to call for it, if we can't, do it in the budget, it doesn't have to be the full blown out checklist, this by this by this. But a lot of times we start getting into a project, and if we decide, okay, we don't need to do this part of the process, we start to hit blockers, and we say, okay, we need to take a step back, and we do need to do this thing. So I think it's mostly just points that we've established that when we do these things, it helps us later on. When we don't do these things, we always hit issues. And so documenting that, keeping track of those, and always questioning it, always letting it be a flexible thing that grows and gets defined as it goes. And as we grow and the project's scope changes and things like that, I think having the flexibility, but also knowing those key points is basically the foundation of the process and how it grows.
And I think
go ahead.
Okay. We have a set of deliverables that everybody's responsible for in certain points of the process, and it's all documented. And you have, this one comes out at this point in the process, and so on and so forth. And we all have different responsibilities. And before any document goes to any client ever, there's an internal review and there's a meeting about it. So there's some formal format for the internal team saying, I looked at this, and here's what I think, and here's what I think needs to change before the client sees it. So from that perspective, there's some really formal areas where we always have formal feedback. And then beyond that, I think it becomes really that we all care about our job, and we are always looking at what's happening with the project all the time. No one ever really checks out of a project, even when you are part. Like for me, example, as a UX person, the majority of my role starts at the beginning of the project, and as it continues, I have less and less to do. But I'm always reading all the emails, and I pay attention all the way through. So if something comes up in production or QA, I'm there to address it. And because part of our culture is to always be invested in the project you're in and to care about the work that you do, I will go and make sure I take care of it, regardless of whether or not someone told me to or a project manager followed up with me. It's just sort of what we do. And we do that via email or IM or just talking to each other. There are a number of ways to make it happen.
Yeah, I think the combination of process and culture drives that collaboration and success. And obligatory book plug here, but our Nancy and Megan their book will be published and available April 22nd on interactive project management. That contains all the nuts and bolts of our process. Process is wonderful, but it isn't a substitute for thinking. It is not a magic checklist to success. You need great people, and you need a great culture.
Can you talk a little bit, Kevin, about how you guys, or anybody, how Clockwork deals with scope creep?
Our favorite risk.
Yeah.
I think it's all of ours.
I don't think anybody's unfamiliar or doesn't have kind of a horror story about that. Really, at the start of the project, we do a requirements definition with the client. We try to get their goals. The trick is a lot of times the client will come to us with a solution saying, "Hey, I want you guys to do this." And a lot of times, it's a good solution and it can work. And a lot of times we have to say, all right, let's take a step back and figure out why you want to do this. What's the problem that's driving you to this solution? And really, the nice thing about Clockwork is the whole team gets together at the kickoff, and anybody in that meeting can say, well, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's understand why we're doing this, how we're getting to the spot, decide what the requirements are to get there, and get buy-in from the client early to agree to, all right, this is what we're trying to accomplish, this is how we're going to get there, before, we've recently, or I guess not recently, but we always have a planning budget built into our projects, and we're more and more driving into that we need planning to kind of all be on the same page before we get started. And that being said, scope still comes up. A lot of times it doesn't really become solid until you see design or you see a wireframe or something like that, and that's just inevitable. And I think, to Matt's point earlier, one of the things that we push at Clockwork also is that good and bad messages are delivered at the same speed and as early as possible. And so a lot of times the relationship that project managers have with clients, or clients being introduced to a few different members of the team, make it easier to have those conversations and be in that spot where you can have discussions about it, rather than it just being kind of a big explosion surprise.
Yeah, I mean, it's never easy to manage, and given that we do put a lot of effort into planning and analysis before, and surrogate artifacts before we have prototypes or iterations of a website or a project. But Kevin's absolutely right. As soon as some visual artifacts that are clickable and work start to surface, and you can click through things and see, oh, actually, no, I didn't mean it that way. I meant, X, Y, and Z, or I come up with a new idea. Yep, scope creeps. And that's where that good and bad news at the same velocity concept comes in. The more immediate you can provide feedback on this is going to mean a change. It is a change because of here's what we agreed to previously, and here's sort of a threat assessment for that change. Can we handle it within our current budget? What might the timeline impact be? And just prepare the client so that that doesn't come as a late-breaking surprise, or you have to make a phone call and say the schedule slipped 2 months. It didn't slip 2 months as of yesterday. It's just that lots of little things that no feedback was delivered on have accumulated, and suddenly you're 2 months behind, which is a terrible situation to be in.
And one of the first documents we do is called a management plan, and in that management plan is a section about how to tackle scope creep, and how it's a risk. We might identify it. Here's what we're going to do to take action if we have scope creep, and our PMs they're empowered to leverage. I mean, in a solution-oriented way, leverage that document and say, look, this impacts us going forward.
I also think,
go ahead.
From an agency's perspective, getting something that works for you makes a lot of sense, and we've kind of worked out what works for us. I know from some past experiences working with startups and smaller things, I mean, sometimes you can't write 10 documents that outline all of this and have 6 people thinking about how it's going to be built before it's built. And sometimes you just kind of have to go. But I've also had the projects where I've gotten major burned on doing things like that and getting ahead of myself and whatever. And having something that works for you, taking an hour and saying, all right, I might eat an hour on this. Or maybe I can get to an established point where I can build that into as part of my estimating process of, hey, we need to work out some requirements around here. Having a one-page document email that gets sent out to the client that says, this is how I understand what you're asking for. This is what I'm planning to do. Is that right? Like, let's talk about this early and decide on this. And then having this experience to be able to recognize, oh, yeah, this is something new that we didn't talk about before. And I'm going to call that out right now so that we're both aware that we're now talking about something new. And so, without having a lot of documentation and process and people around it, there's still those small things where if you kind of just take a step back in yourself and say, oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me write an email. Let me get us on the same page so that later we can say, all right, this is what we talked about. This is now what we're talking about. Here's the difference. How are we going to work out that difference? It's the same idea, just whatever works for you.
And it seems like, too, a lot of scope creep comes up when you're in a meeting and you're reviewing some documents with a client, or you're reviewing sometimes it happens in wireframe, sometimes it happens further down, and the client says, oh, well, I thought this was going to do this. And we're all sitting in a meeting, we're like, we didn't know that was supposed to do that, but okay, can we talk a little bit about that? And after the meeting, we'll go back to the requirements definition. Was that there? Yes or no? If no, okay, how critical is this function? What does the client really want? And, I've sat in a room and we've come up with 5 or 10 different ways we can solve that problem for the client. Sometimes, and it starts from the very most complex, most difficult way to solve the problem, that will cost the most money, and we go all the way down to the simplest, easiest thing that we can do to alleviate whatever the issue is without causing impact on time and budget. So I think it's a matter, too, of working together and coming up with a solution. And often we can come up with something that we can say to the client, well, we know you wanted to do this, but it will cause this and this to happen to the project. However, we can do this instead, and you'll get the same effect. Or we've solved the solution or the problem in another way that you weren't expecting, and that can help solve the scope issue.
Does that answer your question? Yeah, I mean, it's not a scope creep silver bullet. Sorry, I don't have one.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. Yeah.
So one of the classic friction points is between development and QA. And another classic friction point is between development and operations. And I know you guys are an agency, so you probably don't do operations per se.
Oh, we actually do, yeah.
Okay. Even if you don't, the stuff you build has to run somewhere. So can you speak to that whole topic of the DevOps topic?
Absolutely. So just part of our culture is that the tech group really doesn't have a lot of crisp boundaries between who receives information. We have an alias where all programmers, all QA, and all ops, all sysadmins, all share information all the time. Because quite honestly, if a dev thinks something is interesting and shoots it out to that alias, the ops team probably thinks it's interesting too, and usually can follow up with even better information or build on an idea before it ever sees a spec or a dev plan in a way that benefits the whole group. At Clockwork, we don't just design and build and then hand off work. The vast majority of our business we host on a private cloud platform that we host. Clockwork came out of Bitstream Underground, one of the first regional ISPs in Minneapolis-St. Paul. So we have hosting in our blood, and we certainly have DevOps in our blood. We have a dedicated DevOps team focused on maintenance of that platform, growth, new features, as well as maintaining and expanding the systems administration and platform infrastructure. So again, it follows the theme of the discussion. don't put people in silos. Let the admins talk to the devs. Let the devs talk to the admins by all means, and find any way you can to let that happen. Because it's likely that each group has something to share and a perspective that one might not have. For example, just the other day, I was working on an integration issue where a third party's load balancers did not provide any way for the receiving web server to differentiate between a HTTP and non-HTTP or HTTPS request. And I was looking at it from a viewpoint of a sysadmin because I've done that in the past. And I came and talked to one of my other admins and described the situation, described how difficult it was to communicate what we needed to be in that HTTP request that was received on that render node. And they pointed out, you're thinking about this like someone on the ops team. You're talking with developers. You're assuming too much. And just insights like that, social or technical, make the concept worthwhile, in my opinion. I mean, it's great to be able to bounce database ideas off the admins when they full well know the types of queries that have been brutalizing our database server for the last years.
I also think that idea translates well to the front end too. We have a pixels alias, we call it, and kind of our pixels team, which is the designers, the front end developers, and the UX team. And so we have an alias where if designers see a site that's really pushing CSS3 or design or something, they shoot it out and we all comment on it and rip it apart and see how they did it and use their web inspectors and things like that. But I think it also really fosters a good communication when we have designers handing off a Photoshop or Illustrator or whatever document to front-end developers. We have not necessarily a meeting, but just a quick sit-down session. Just grab a table or a chair somewhere and talk about, which of the rounded corners is it important that all browsers see it? Can we use CSS3? Can we not? Are these gradients important on IE 7 or 6? Or what are the browsers and the requirements definition that we need to focus on? Are some of these questions even important? Are iPads on there? Is this going to be a hover state or an active state, or how is this going to work? And just always having that constant communication channel and having both understand both languages, it makes that handoff really easy. But then it also, as production has questions while they're executing the designs, it makes it a lot easier because you've talked about a lot of that base stuff. You're all speaking the same language and you're pushing each other. We have designers that have done production, have done responsive coding, front-end coding on sites that actually launched and are out there. We have front-end developers that take stabs at designs or do design over the shoulder sort of thing, where designers just saying, yeah, modify the margin a little bit there and bump up the padding and things like that, and just kind of on the fly coding. And it's a lot of fun, and it really pushes both teams, I think, to do better work and be able to communicate.
Last thought, fellas.
So as far as team building activities, I recommend Willy-Nilly retreats, truck calls. Like, how do I make my people get along?
We work with Stella, so you can ignore him.
I recommend boxing in an inflatable boxing ring.
Remote control sharks are also really fun. If you have the opportunity to have one, we had one day. I think we spent all day it was sort of it was one of our lab days, which is a part of all culture. We have the chance to explore other projects and do things that are sort of fun and work on things internally, and a lot of things come out of that. Improvements to our product, our process. Sometimes things that are just fun, like we did Edward Me, which was you take any picture and it makes you look like Edward Cullen from Twilight. That was someone's request. So one day we had an inflatable shark that was controlled with a remote, and we walked around and bumped it into people's heads, and it was just one of those things that everyone had a chance to laugh and blow off some steam, and you got to know a little bit more about the people who were controlling the shark and who they really liked.
And I think it's another thing too is if you try to interview at Clockwork, some people really get put off by it because you interview with about 10 different people before you ever get in. You go through 3 to 5 rounds of interviews, just because it's up to the team. Is this somebody that is going to be able to sit at the kitchen table and have the types of, fun conversations and be part of the culture that's a good fit? So, you really have to know your technical sides of things, and you get the technical interviews, but you also get the group cultural interviews. And so it makes it really easy when, we have events, or we go play Frisbee in the back lot, or we're having a group lunch with 30 people discussing potentially politically incorrect topics at the kitchen table, or whatever it might be. But yeah, it's a big group of people that all want to be hanging out together, and I think it's important.
Collaboration's a lot easier when you like to talk to one another.
Take away.
We're out of time.